So today we are at T. Cribb Funeral Directors, established in 1881, and this is the senior partner, Mr. John Harris. It's very nice to meet you, John. Thank you for your invitation.
And welcome.
And well, can you tell me something about the company, company history?
Quick potted history. It was my great-grandfather that started the business back in 1881 in Rathbone Street, which is a typical market area in the East End of London. He had 5 children, and it was his son, Tom Cribb, who sort of took on the second generation. But Kitty, his daughter, married a Harris, and hence the name change, because Tom Cribb, the junior, never married, so there was no children to continue the business. Kitty had a son, Stan, my father, hence the name change. So that makes me sort of 4th generation, and there's my children, my brother's children in the business now, to make the 5th. We moved into these larger premises something like nearly 30 years ago, and it was mainly because of the changing of the East End of London, the demographics. If you considered I've been down here 53 years now, and when I started, typical East End funerals, quite lavish, no expense spared on coffins, services, the body's always laid at home. We would have sometimes 2, 3, 4 hearses, some with flowers, or most with flowers. You know, we could have up to 20 odd limousines following behind. A real proper... The East End was just known for its funerals. However, we go back 30 odd years, the demographics changed. It was really interesting. A few years back we hosted the Olympics here in East London. In this borough, Newham.
And in 2012, I believe?
Yeah, and it was really interesting because I was listening to the introduction of the Olympics, and some reporter turned around and he's gone, it's really great here in Newham. They're going to be hosting people from 147 countries. And I thought to myself, well, we do better than that on a normal day. You know, it's and so that gives you an idea. So we had to change. The new cultures coming in have obviously different needs. You know, we needed Hindu Sikh washrooms. When African families, Caribbean families come in to do a traditional washing and dressing, they don't turn up in 2s and 3s, they turn up in 40s and 50s. You know, even during COVID, I think in the first weeks of COVID with the lockdown, where 2 people only were supposed to be doing anything, I think I had my first 52-seater coach turn up with a Ghanaian family. So it was, it's very much changed. So here, as you'll see later on, you know, we can host a funeral service for over 200 people. We have our Hindu Sikh washrooms. We do all-night vigils for Filipino families. A lot of, funny enough, a lot of Polish and Romanian families like to do these vigils where they'll all come together
and pray.
We'll have an Orthodox minister priest come in to take a service here, and they bring all their food in, and it becomes party time.
A celebration of life.
Absolute celebration of life.
That's a poignant thing.
So, I mean, we're very fortunate. This part of Newham was just a leftover from the war, really. There was the old gasworks and pig farm, and they built a new town, really, in Beckton. So we was able to get the ground to develop what we've got now. I mean, you wouldn't be able to do it, you know, today. It would be impossible. But it works.
How many branches do you have?
We've got 24 branches,
24.
All in all. They're sort of split up, you know. This is what I would consider a sort of hub, and we have 5 or 6 branches working off of here. And then we've got another one. Because what happened was, there was a migration, a huge migration, from the East End, the East Enders, families, moving out into Essex. They sort of, for those that would know this area, they got on the A13, which is a principal road out into Essex, and they didn't stop until they got their feet wet down at Southend-on-Sea. And we was very conscious that first generation of families will come back because you've been dealing with them for generations, so they knew you as part of a family. We also recognise the fact that the second generation, you're not going to have that same bond with. By the time you get to the third generation, they're not going to know you. So we moved down into Essex at various stages so that we could then engage with that next generation. So you continue to work on. So my brother went down. We're always going to get calls. One of the problems, just digressing for a minute, is I make the fatal mistake of giving out my personal mobile phone to families. So I get phone calls 24/7, 365 days. If I'm arranging a funeral, I always tell families I'll phone them back. I've sat on a beach in Greece once and arranged a funeral. So it's the joys of mobile, or I'd say the joys, I use that
making
loosely,
shipments from hospitals some time ago. So
but anyway, we're very fortunate because my brother and I still work in the business. In fact, my dad's 97 coming up and still has an active interest in the company, although he stopped conducting funerals when he was 90. He thought it was time to hang up his top hat. As I say, we're very fortunate because there's myself and my brother. There's 5 children in that next generation. So we can spread out. So, as a family, you've still got control. Although it looks as though you've got a lot of offices, it's manageable. And Sarah, my middle daughter, and myself, we sort of look after the London bit. And ours now is just dealing with, when I say the new families, I mean, some of our Hindu families, Sikh families, African for that, we're sort of second, third generation working with those families now. So, and it's really funny because if you look, as a prime example, of a lot of our African families, their attitude towards death and their sort of want to sort of celebrate a death is almost a mirror image of what the East End used to be. They want the nice coffin, they want to come and see the relative, it's all about the funeral. It takes a lot longer than an East End funeral. Back then, if you looked at a service 50 years ago, you would be round the house, it would take you longer to load flowers on than it would the actual funeral service. You got to the chapel, ministers in those days, you'd have a service 10, 15 minutes in chapel, straight to the graveside. But the irony of it is, the real coming together as a family and friends would be back at the wake, back at the pub, back at the family home. That's when they all enjoyed the stories of the person who's passed away, rekindling old memories. Whereas nowadays, with those more traditional families, it's all about the eulogy. So you actually end up doing a lot of the talking about that person during a funeral service now. And not so many always go back to the wake. So a bit of a change in culture there as far as we're concerned. But the African families, you have everything. You have a lot beforehand, you'll have a 2-3 hour service, and then the bash will go on then for 2 days sometimes.
For 2 days?
Well, you'll have the funeral invariably on a Friday. You'll then have something happening on the Saturday, and then very often they'll have a church service on the Sunday. We ended up opening a branch in Ghana in West Africa some 20 years ago.
20 years ago.
Because a lot of our work now is repatriation. Because of first generation, certainly of African families living here, want to be buried at home. Not so much second, certainly not third, but first generation, a lot. I mean, I do more burials in Nigeria than I do in our local cemeteries. It's just, gives you an idea of demographics. I mean, we're virtually at the airport every day. So it's, very much a change of what it used to be. So as I say, we're sort of dealing with a lot of our new but old families, for want of an expression.
And I've seen those crazy caskets in Africa. Is that a thing?
Well, they are Ghanaian. So if you looked at the bulge of West Africa where Ghana is, the coastal region, the Gars, that's very traditional. So if you're a chili farmer, your coffin would be a chili pod. If you was a minister, your coffin would be shaped like a Bible. I've often wondered how they'd cope with me if I died out there. I'd just get a coffin. It's the way it would be, yeah.
How old were you when you started, and what were your very first impressions?
How old was I when I started? It was really funny because, as I say, there's myself and my brother. Graham always wanted to be in the family business, and so he used to sort of bunk off school and go down with father and give all sorts of excuses why he wasn't at school, but he was happy. He was always coming into the family business. I actually wanted to be a vet or an accountant, would you believe? Had no interest in the family business at all at that stage. So we used to come down, we had a very small office, which I'll show you, got a picture of over there, which was sort of left after the war, all the top was blown out. So I'm going back to the sort of late 60s, and we were still operating out of this one little shop, for want of a better expression. All the top still blown out, left over from the war. So it had
drafty.
Eh?
A little drafty.
Just a bit drafty. It was like a huge pigeon loft. And I used to find it interesting going in there because we did all the polishing for the coffins. We had a yard where the coffins were made. They used to come over in their sort of natural state, and then typically, as it was back in the day, funeral directors would, as you walked in the front door of funeral directors, there would be trestles, and Dad would be polishing coffins or moulding a coffin, and you had this tiny little office. It was very, very much, it was more of a workshop than anything. But that, as I say, was as it was, because what you have to remember back in the time, a body never lied at the funeral directors. It always stayed at home. So we would be making the coffins, finishing the coffins, and then literally taking them around the house and putting the body into the coffin there, setting it all up. And I can remember, probably it might have been early 70s, when at our garage we put a 10 by 8 shed in, and that was our state-of-the-art chapel of rest. And when I think back to it, I mean, it was crude. It was a shed for all intents and purposes, and painted in nice council colours, because that's where we got the paint from. But yeah, it was very basic. So I never had any interest. When I left school, I started college, but then I obviously needed cash as well. So I was doing a few days at college and then doing some bearing, clearing up general work, being in the workshop, and got sucked in really. And that's the only way I can describe it. But I enjoyed the workshop. I did 5 years, and we literally making coffins back then. Literally a pile of wood, and you cracked on with it, moulding and polishing. Then I'd be out on the van. The business then, when Graham and I started, in fact, we couldn't, the company couldn't afford to employ us because Dad had 3 people working for him at that stage. We were doing very little work as such. Competition was really fierce. When my dad's sort of mid-term in the business, in Rathbone Street there was 5 Undertakers in Rathbone Street alone. If you looked at the whole of Newham, I mean, blimey, they was on every street corner. There was as many funeral directors as I think there were pubs. The irony, today as we sit here, we're the last family funeral director left in the whole of Newham. And you've just got a few of the corporates left, which gives you a little idea of how things have changed in this area. So anyway, that was it really, and sort of never looked back. And gradually, as we've grown, and a lot of what we've done in expanding has been because of the change in the area. we've had to evolve. And I think our strength was others didn't. As you look around you, we've always invested back in the business. So
it shows.
Yeah, we've never run off with the cash. We've always put it back into the business. And I think that's where we've benefited.
Okay, so I have this question, how the English funeral industry changed during your lifetime, but you've already answered it. But how are the newest generations
There's some big changes.
Okay.
There's some big changes now. COVID has changed the funeral business considerably, and in one real aspect, direct cremation. Now, I don't know if you've come across this so much, but we ended up with, during COVID, we was told, either you couldn't attend, or only 30 people can attend, or only 10 people can attend, and we would stream the funerals. And during COVID, people would say, oh, well, we won't have a funeral now. We'll wait when, the doors are open again, and in 3 months' time, we'll all have a get-together and have a memorial service and a party. Never happened. Never heard of one. I'm sure there's going to be people out there say, oh, well, we did this. There's a few. But trust me, it never really happened as we was told. With mourning, you don't put it off to another day. Mm-hmm. When a death happens, there is a natural mourning period. We're all different in how we cope with that and how we deal with that. But the long and the short of it is there is a natural progression. What's fascinated me is a good few years back now, we had such a thing as direct cremation turn up on your doorstep. Now this is where there's various companies around. You literally phone them up, you send them, to simplify it, you send them a cheque and a death certificate and they send you back a casket of ashes. That's it. No service. There is nothing. You don't view the body. You literally just
get rid of it.
Please dispose of the body. That's as raw as it is. Direct cremation has come about, and that is literally you send a company or these companies a death certificate and a cheque, and they send you back a casket of ashes. So no service, no viewing in a chapel, no saying goodbye, nothing, which I find remarkable. You're contacted by the hospital, mum's passed away, dad's passed away, dad's passed away. Okay, you phone up, and the next thing you know is a pot of ashes turns up. And you think to yourself, I'm sure it must work for some people. I'm very much a traditionalist, as you've probably worked out. And I find that quite remarkable. I'm sure I couldn't cope with that. In our family, my mum would never have she hated the idea of viewing a body. That was my mum's little thing. When Dad, Graham and myself used to all leave the office and Mum was left in the office and we had bodies in the chapel, we'd have to say, right, there's a couple of chapels there, Mrs. So-and-so's in that one, Mrs. So-and-so's in that one, and Mum would show people through and all that. She'd never seen a body. How you can work in a funeral directors and not be involved in that. But that was her. And the point of that is that when she passed away, you'd respect that. But because she died suddenly, we brought her back, you had to, for me personally, you have to see it because it's a bit of reality. For me, it wasn't. And I remember the funeral very well because it wasn't till afterwards, because right up until the day that she was buried, she was still with us, really. You hadn't lost her, and I'm sure everyone can relate if they've lost people, There's some mornings you wake up and you think, everything's dandy, and then suddenly it dawns on you, you've lost somebody. And then you cope with the next day. And then after the funeral, you go through the periods of, adjusting, for want of a better expression. So the idea of a pure cremation, I can't get my head round. But it's a huge impact on the funeral trade in this country now. But what's interesting is, it is pretty well white English. I can never imagine any of my African families, my Asian families, you know, the Romanians, you know, the Polish. I can't imagine them doing that. It's just, it's the exact opposite. It's all about a celebration of a life. There's always been a difference in cultures. You know, like, for example, when someone in our culture, if someone young dies, you know, you get a big turnout, friends and all that. It's more likely to be an elaborate funeral, do you know? By the time you get someone passing away in their 80s and 90s, they've outlived their contemporaries and all their friends and all that. They might have been in a home or not been socialising. So, you know, you have a smaller congregation.
I've seen that many times.
Yeah. In Africa, it's different. Now, in Ghana, you know, you'll have a funeral for a sort of 80, 90-year-old. You might have 1,500 people turn up. You know, there is a celebration of that life. You know, it's a long life. Whereas if a child or a younger person dies, it's almost a bad death. It's almost, you know, in some areas, you lose a baby or a child. It's like a taboo. You've been cursed almost. So, you know, there's always been a difference in cultures. However, I just couldn't imagine these other cultures that I deal with, you know, not having a funeral service and a thanksgiving or a celebration of someone's life. So I don't know whether that's just uniquely English. I know it's happening now in Canada and America quite a bit, but I don't know what that says. I think it was Gladstone, I can't remember his whole quote, but the long and the short of his quote was, you can judge a society by how it treats its dead. So I don't know how we would look at our society and the way we're treating our dead at the moment, but it begs a question.
Well, I've seen from my experience while collecting the bodies that the younger the generation, the more scary and obnoxious the dead is for them. My record was collecting a lady and bringing her to the morgue 1 hour after her death. She was still warm, so they was just, that's not our mother anymore, that's just a disgusting corpse. Let's get rid of it as soon as possible. So that's it becomes a huge taboo, and I don't like that, to be honest, because...
Did you think that was a cultural thing, or was that just unique to that family?
No, that's a cultural, that's a sign of the times, I think.
Really?
Yeah. I have a good example. When you look at the old gravestones, you can read, here lies the corpse of this and that. And on the new gravestones, you have like, fallen into eternal sleep.
Yeah.
So it's like a fairy tale, like they are not dead, they are sleeping. And
I know in my time, you know, back when I first started, people died. They pass away nowadays. So there is this difference. But again,
it changes.
Yeah, but historically, if you went prior to the 1750s and you looked at gravestones before the 1750s, you'd have nice skulls and crossbones and images of death. You know, after the 1750s, it was all nice wings and angels and soft stuff.
Exactly.
So it's no different, I suppose, in that respect. But parting, you know, at an actual time of death, you know, stones and memorials and all that are done, you know, a good time afterwards. Whereas when somebody actually physically dies, so they're there 1 minute, gone the next, I just find that strange that you can say, you know, just dispose of the body. But then I'm old school. You know, to me, the body is still the last, that's just the last mortal remains of that person. They still command, for me, respect. And I just find it difficult that people don't. Look, we're all different. But, you know, for it to, this whole sea of change, I find, you know, quite remarkable. That's a good study for someone at a uni somewhere, to see why we're happy to do that, and happy to do that, rather than a proper memorialisation or a thanksgiving of that person's life. You know, I do feel that in a lot of cases, that in families that will come back to haunt them, because you know, I've had an example, and it's a good example, where a couple, the young lad died. He was out in the States, so they had a business out in the States. And he died here in the UK. East End stock, his father had lived in the old East End of London for years. I've known the family. And he'd left in his will, he just wanted one of these direct cremate. Nobody at the service, just take my body, cremate it. So the dad came in to me and said, look, I know it's my son's wish for this to happen, but I can't cope. I need to see his remains. I can't get my head around he's not there. You know, he never saw him beforehand. So I said, well, it is the partner's say. I mean, I've got no problems with it, but you need to discuss it with your son's partner. And the partner had no problem with it. But then there's this dilemma, his son's wish. You know, am I going against my son's wish? Mm-hmm. I said, well, that's an easy one to solve. I said, let's imagine that you're discussing with your son before he died, his funeral. And you turned around to him and said, and he said, oh, I want a pure cremation when I die. I don't want any of this fuss. But you said to him, yeah, but I'd really like to say goodbye to you just one last time. That would mean a lot to me. Would your son turn around and say, no, you can't do that? He said, well, no. I said, well, there's your answer. I said, so we can have that. You know, we just had that conversation, so let's do that. He said, I've got one other thing. He said, I just can't get my head around either. Bearing in mind the East End funerals I've described, these big lavish cavalcade of cars. He said, I just don't want him to go on his final journey on his own. So I said, well, the same question applies. If you would have asked him while he was alive, would you mind if I followed the hearse to the crematorium just to see you on your last journey? Would he have said no? He said, oh, no. I said, well, there you go then. We'll do that. So, you know, that if we would have just turned around and said, no, that's it, how does Dad cope with his son's death? Do you know, I don't think there's any person, you know, I've got children, I can't ever imagine myself being in his position, never want to be. And if that's all he's got to hang on to in losing his son, he needs that, doesn't he? You know, who is a funeral for? Is it the living or the dead? Is the question, isn't it? And obviously, it has to be for the living.
It is for the living.
It is for the living. And I think there are families, many families, that will not regret so much, but suffer because they've not had that final goodbye. You know, I think there's going to be some problems going forward with certain families.
I think it'll hit them much later.
Yeah.
When it's
you can't.
too late.
Funerals didn't just, you know, Undertakers didn't wake up one day, you know, or evolve one day and think, oh, let's do funerals, and let's sell funerals out there. They've evolved over centuries, and they've evolved for reasons, and most of the reason is about that saying goodbye. You know, I can go back to my early days, and there'll be lots of reasons for it. You know, there was one-upmanship. You know, I remember doing a funeral once where they had 10 limousines following behind. We struggled to put 3-4 people in each limousine. But because the neighbours had 8 limousines, we're going to have 10 because, you know, we're better than them. So there was a lot of that. But equally so, there was big families. You know, just if you had 15, 16 kids, you know, they had their partners, there was grandkids. Sometimes you'd need 15 limousines with 6 people in each limousine just to get the main family in. Forget the deceased brothers and sisters who probably came from big families as well. And the other point on that is socially, how often is it said, you go to a funeral, the only time we ever meet are weddings and funerals. Well, if we don't have funerals anymore, and weddings aren't as popular as they used to be, you know, people are, if they do bother to get married and go and have a select few people at a registrar's or somewhere on a beach somewhere, or, but the traditional big wedding, okay, they happen, but probably not as frequently. So if you're taking funerals and weddings out of the social circle, when, as extended family and friends, do we get together again? You don't.
Pretty much never.
No.
Yeah.
So, is that a breakdown in society? Or the start of a breakdown in society? Sounds very dramatic, I know. But it's just a question, and that's why I struggle with the direct cremation bit.
I blame the social networks for that. Because paradoxically, we are connected to each other. The whole world is connected, but we are further and further away from those normal, everyday interactions.
Yeah.
I remember that we didn't have these... when you want to enter a home, you have this dial that you dial a number and of the flat, and someone says hello and let me in. And when I was young, we needed to shout. Then we had surnames, that you could. This here lives this one and that one. You had this telephone books with every address and name and telephone, which would be unimaginable. Please help me with this word.
Unimaginable.
That's right. Today. So I think that changes. But I would like to just add to what you said before that. I was speaking with my father about his eventual funeral. My father is 74 right now, and he's in very good health. And I would like him to be 100, as he himself wants to as well, but he doesn't want to hear anything about it. My mother is completely different. She's like me. She's curious, always looking at dead bodies and when there's an occasion. But my father is just he just pushes it away like it's a huge taboo for him. And at first he was terrified that I became an Undertaker, but now he's proud of me. So, but still, I have no idea how he would be to be buried. And what I know is that I wouldn't imagine anyone else than me handling my parents' bodies as a preparation for the funeral. That's just out of the question. So. Whatever they say, I'm not going to oblige.
Well, I can't imagine, as I say, my father started work at 14 during the Blitz. And being a funeral director, where we are here, we've got all the main docks. So it was probably one of the most bombed areas during the war. And as a youngster, at 14, you can imagine, he was a groom. We still had our horses then, although we've got them back now, but, so that was his job. So he'd be out on a funeral, and when we'd stopped outside the house, his job would be to stand in front of the two horses, and they was all stallions, remember, and to hold them steady while they load the flowers, the families get in, then he would jump on the back of the mourning vehicle, and they'd go off to the cemetery. And his first experience of an air raid during his working day, he was outside our house with his holding the two horses. Air raid sirens when there's a raid coming. So in those days, out the back of the houses, these were all terraced houses. There'd be the Anderson shelter there, and he was halfway down the hallway to go to the shelter with the family when
during the funeral.
Because so it's gone off. So all the family now are going to go and shelter until the all clear. My father's halfway down the passage of this house to go to the rear of the house to the Anderson shelter. And Uncle Tom said, well, where are you going, boy? He said, well, to the shelter. He said, you have to look after the horses. So he had to come out. So there's a 14-year-old with a pair of stallions while there's an air raid going on.
With a casket.
With the coffins there, everything. Well, what else can you do? Yeah. You're not going to run to cover with the horses. And so he grew up. I mean, we had the swimming baths at Romford, on Romford Road, not far from probably about 4 miles from here. That was drained out, and that was a temporary mortuary so when they went round, you can imagine, whole streets would be taken out. So the bodies would be collected and then processed back, because you imagine a swimming pool all drained out. It's a lovely tiled area. It's a perfect temporary mortuary. And there, as a 14-year-old, there'd be Uncle Tom. It'd be a blackout, so they'd be down there in the swimming bath, Uncle Tom with his lighter, going around looking at the names on these. They put them in the laundry, the wicker laundry baskets, bodies and remains of bodies, and going around searching, and that would be it. They would have to get the bodies from there, and you think to yourself, God, in this day and age, a 14-year-old, you'd be counselling him for the next 30 years, wouldn't you? Whereas in those days, it was just, get on with it. It's
everyday
life. A very, very pragmatic, and Uncle Tom, like Tom Cribb, so he's your second generation, so that's Dad's uncle. A very straightforward, black and white character, just got on with the job. He was quite funny actually, because you never got any praise. Why? Because, you was doing your job. That's what you're supposed to do. That's what you get paid for. You'd soon be told if you wasn't doing it properly. and the only reason you knew you was really doing it properly is you wasn't criticised. So again, that was an era. Nowadays you have to be ever so careful, and we've got an HR department looking after all that now. And my girls try and keep me away from that. I'm still old school, so we're living a different era. But, if you think about my time, but then look at Dad's, from the age of 14, 80 odd years, can you imagine the changes that he saw in this profession? So, yeah, quite dramatic.
We got way softer since then.
Sorry?
Today's people are way softer than yesterday's people.
Yeah, we look at excuses not to do things, and we look at excuses for stuff and all that, rather than just being a little bit more get on with it.
Yeah, and easy gratification.
Yeah.
Easy pleasures.
Yeah.
Instant pleasures.
Yeah.
That's why Netflix is so popular. You can binge watch the whole show.
See, back in the day, you had alcohol, which was much easier.
That's a huge part of your culture.
Yeah.
As the late Ozzy Osbourne said, English culture is job pub.
But that was it. You look at the East End of London now, where our pubs and all that gone. Most of them have disappeared. And again, that was a social centre. People easily just, you can get a takeaway. You don't even have to go out now to get a takeaway, and at least you could socialise down the chip shop, but now you just phone up and somebody delivers it to you. So where is the point in moving out of the house? As I said, you're very organised and all that, and I just naturally go off-piste, once I start talking about something, and then we'll end up going down. I always look at it's... when I went to university, it sort of dawned on me then that I'll pick on a subject and I might be given something to write on a particular piece. And I would get home, I'd start to research that. Then you find something else and you think, that's interesting. And then before you realise, you're way down another path looking at something else. So I tend to sort of, stray off a bit.
So let me tell you about how organized I am. I made this yesterday at 1 a.m. at night and printed it in the morning, and I forgot almost everything from home. I had this planned already at home. My wife needed to send it to me, and I needed to add to it because I would be so overwhelmed as I am now. that I would forget what's my name and what I wanted to ask you. So I'm far from being organized. I'm all over the place. I'm interested in everything, and so is my father. As you are saying, I'm exactly the same. I'm researching something, and there's it's like in this Red Riding Hood fairy tale. So yeah, I always end up deep in the forest. But thank you for thinking like that. Don't worry. I didn't expect to make such an impression of an organized person.
Well, you've done it well. You fooled me anyway, and you're not the first though. It's all right.
Okay, I have questions about the cremains, because you told me about the direct cremations, but can you keep the cremains at home, and can you scatter them wherever you please? What's the law in England about that?
None really. In as much as we will say, for example, we've collected on behalf of a family. I give them to you. You could go down the River Thames and scatter them. You could go to a holiday spot somewhere that you like, a cliff somewhere, a nice walk, and scatter them. I've had some really interesting episodes at scattering ashes, as long as no one's getting too upset. For example, I'm not really a football supporter because I support West Ham, but we used to have families that would want their ashes scattered on the pitch over at where they played at Upton Park. And as long as you did it formally with them, they're fine. If you decided to go over there one day and you're standing up in the stands and start scattering them around, you're going to upset somebody, yeah. You look like a scene from The Great Escape and they're coming down your trouser leg. So you don't really want that. So there are restrictions. However, there are none, as long as you've got permission from wherever you are. But if you was on the moors or somewhere like that and you scattered ashes, it's not a drama.
So it's not forbidden, and anything that's not forbidden is permitted. So
is fair. I mean, if you think with all of our Hindu Sikh funerals, they'll invariably, there's boat services now on the River Thames that you can literally book the boat, you get all your family on, they'll do food and drinks, and you take your priest and you have a ceremony of scattering the ashes. You have some interesting ones. On a windy day when it's raining, scattering ashes from the deck is not always easy. So now we have these lovely sort of urns, for want of a better expression, but containers, which are just made of paper. So they just dissolve.
I've seen one made of
as a lot
sand
more controlled.
As well.
Yeah.
With some kind of an organic glue.
Nowadays, it's like coffins. Anything that seems to grow or move out there, they'll make a coffin out of. I can supply a coffin. We started with going with wicker, but then you can have your seagrass. You can have water hyacinth stems, bamboo. Yeah, it's just endless. There's always, and it does make me laugh because they always sort of are sold on this as a green option. The mere fact that they've travelled halfway around the world from China doesn't sort of come into it, but it's your green option.
And then rent a boat.
Yeah. And yet, we sort of look down, we've got one company down in Somerset where they actually do grow the seagrass, grow the reeds, and actually make it. So it is a cottage industry here with low impact. But so many people seem to overlook those for something different, but yeah.
There's a strange view on ecology. When I look at the whole mountain ranges of solar panels in China, that doesn't look eco-friendly to me at all.
No. Yeah, it's just strap them all to the Great Wall, yeah. But it's funny enough, they was talking about it this morning. We're getting into another field, I know, but about extracting gas from the North Sea, and you think to yourself, well, we've got this transition from fossil fuel to renewables, but while we're doing this transition, let's ship our gas from the far reaches of Russia and use that rather than just tap into a little bit that we've got left and just help with that transition. And you think to yourself, I don't know whether I'm missing something. I mean, I'm not, it's particularly au fait with extracting fossil fuels, but to me it just makes sense that we get it locally while we've still got a little bit. And, just not be so reliant on the rest of the world. But if we're reliant on China for willow coffins, or bamboo coffins, I suppose.
We were the biggest exporter of potatoes in Poland and in the world some time ago, and now I can buy potatoes from Egypt at my local store. So. But anyway, back to cremations.
Yeah.
In Poland, we have this law that it is forbidden to keep cremains at home, and I think this is ridiculous because they are completely clean.
Yeah, they're totally inert.
It's not even. It's hardly organic matter. It's just mineral.
Did they give a reason for it?
No, it's an old law from 1960s, and then there wasn't any reform since then.
Makes you wonder why they wouldn't reform, because I would imagine, but this is out of ignorance, that traditionally you would have been burial.
Yes.
Most of
Ground burial and no vaults.
Yeah. Most Eastern European families that we deal with are burial, except for mainly the Lithuanian families, which invariably have a cremation here and send their cremated remains back and have a service with the urn in their church. Mm-hmm. That's common. But I think Germany's the same, are quite restricted when it comes to, what they're doing with ashes. But as you say, they're totally inert. Why does it? I mean, we can even have burials in the back garden. So a full burial of...
So you have graves here at the premises?
No.
Oh, okay.
I'm talking about if a family came into me and said, I want to bury Dad in the back garden, as long as they get permission from the council and we're not on a water course, we've buried in the back garden. The only problem comes is, that's fine for Mum or Dad, but when the other partner dies, what do you do with the other partner? Because by then the children are thinking, well, we've got the house to sell. Mm-hmm. We've got Nan in the back garden. When you sell a house with a granny annex, you don't expect granny to be in it. It's sort of... and so we get involved in exhumations then. So exhuming the bodies, and then probably having a double cremation service so that families can then sell on the house. But we've done this year already, we've done a few burials on private ground. But I often wonder how that's going to pan out for the future. I was with a family last year, or with a lady last year who's got her husband buried in the back garden. And she's getting older now and was sort of thinking about her demise. And so we've already got plans to do the exhumation and have a double cremation service, and what we're going to do with the ashes. So. But if you went out into a back garden, it's virtually 60% mausolea. Not quite sure how the neighbours think about it, but yeah. Mm.